And we also talked to former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates about the president's trip to the Middle East and more.
The Middle East may be one place where there are some real opportunities and possibilities. It's a place to do business for China, for the United States, for everybody else. The actions of Israel post the October 7th massacre by Hamas has really changed the strategic equation in the Middle East because Iran has been dramatically weakened. Iran's in a very weak place now, and if there is an opportunity to do a deal on nuclear, this is it.
You didn't really like the Obama-era nuclear deal with Iran, but President Trump is trying something that may be somewhat similar. What do you think has to be in it for it to really be a success?
Iran really has to stop their nuclear program. They have to stop their enrichment entirely, and they have to give up.
Entirely, not just highly enriched, all enrichment.
Entirely, and if they want to have a civil nuclear program, they need to import the uranium, the enriched uranium, to do that. But they need to get rid of the stockpile.
Would you oppose an Israeli strike with U.S. support on Iran's nuclear program?
The problem that I've had with a strike on the Iranian nuclear program is that it buys you a year or two. You're not going to be able to destroy, short of, as long as you're using conventional weapons, you cannot get at the very deeply buried parts of the Iranian nuclear program.
We're starting to see some points of friction with the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government in particular. Are we at the point now where President Trump needs to publicly be clear that the war in Gaza has to end and withhold U.S. support if it doesn't?
I think it would be a very heavy political lift for the president to say he's going to cut off military supplies to Israel unless they stop in Gaza. I think he can say a lot of things in terms of putting pressure on Netanyahu to stop the war. He can put forward proposals on how humanitarian assistance and other things might go forward.
Is there a cost to this ongoing support of such a bloody war, given the projections from U.S. intelligence about the long-term recruitment of among terror groups around the world because of the devastation?
I think there is a cost. I think it does provide a basis for radicalization in the region. But it is interesting to me that you're not hearing much out of the Gulf Arabs and others in terms of decrying the ongoing operations and so on.
Secretary of State Rubio said he believes that there won't be a clear read on Vladimir Putin's intentions until he sits down with President Donald Trump. You've met Putin before. Does it really take a face-to-face to judge Putin's intentions?
I'm not sure even in a face-to-face that you can judge Putin's intentions. My own view is Putin feels that he has a destiny to recreate the Russian Empire. Putin hasn't given up on any of his original goals in Ukraine. He's going to insist on occupying all 4 of the eastern provinces of the Donbass. Perpetual recognition of Russian ownership of Crimea, a pro-Russian government in Kyiv, and a Ukrainian military that looks a lot like an enhanced police force. He wants Ukraine basically to be a client state of Russia.
Would you advise President Trump not to take that face-to-face, even if Vladimir Putin was willing to do it?
I would say you need to figure out some leverage that you have going into that meeting with Putin. What can you do that puts more pressure to bear on Putin to make him believe his interests are served by not just a ceasefire, but basically at least freezing things in place?
How sustainable do you think it is for the Secretary of State to also be the National Security Advisor, the acting archivist, and the acting director of USAID?
It's interesting, a lot of people point to the precedent of when Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, from 1973 to 1975. I was at the NSC during most of that period, and all I can tell you is Henry Kissinger was an absentee landlord. I mean, what made it work in that time was that Henry had a very experienced and wise deputy in General Brent Scowcroft. And Scowcroft essentially ran the NSC day to day. And Henry would appear now and then, but mainly did his Secretary of State job. So whether or not this will work, I think, depends on whether the Secretary of State has a deputy at the NSC who is very experienced, knows the interagency, and is respected and trusted by the president.
With this president, I've heard from officials, which is he does not trust National Security Council because of the history with the first impeachment. So he is suspect of a lot of people who sit there. What's the danger of that when you don't trust the people who are briefing you on some of the most sensitive national security issues or advising you?
I think it's important for people to remember the NSC is the president's personal foreign policy staff. So I think if people on the NSC, and I don't care whether they come from the State Department or CIA or the military or any place else or from the outside, on that staff, if you can't be loyal to the president, then you should leave.
What do you mean loyal?
I mean embrace his policies and do what you can to implement those policies and to ensure that the other agencies are implementing the president's policies. And when the time comes, if the time comes, that you disagree with those policies, then it seems to me it's incumbent on you to return to your agency or to leave the government. I think he has a right to expect loyalty. And my line when I was at the NSC was be loyal or be gone.
Mm-hmm. Including when it means having a different view of the last election or having family members who work in the Justice Department. I mean, there are some different definitions of loyalty.
Absolutely. If you hold views that are unacceptable to the president on things like that, like the election and so on, then you probably don't belong in his NSC staff. Maybe you belong at the State Department or at CIA or someplace, but you don't belong inside the White House complex. I think you need to give the president your honest views on things, on the subjects that you're in charge of, and it may be unwelcome to him, but he needs to hear different perspectives and different points of view. So being loyal doesn't mean pulling your punches in terms of the policy debate, but once the president's made a decision, then you have to salute.
Our full interview with Secretary Gates is on our website, our YouTube channel as well.